Hello and welcome to FI for Kids, a podcast about guiding your kids on the path to financial independence and extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Dominic DeLaquil. Our guest today is Sara Ecklein. Sara is the host of the Legacy of Love podcast and the founder of Trust and Honor, a mindful fiduciary agency where her approach is practical, compassionate, and focused on guiding families to live well now and prepare wisely for the future. Welcome, Sara, and thanks for coming on the show.
Dominic, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So why don't we just start with you explaining what a professional fiduciary is and then how you got into that?
Yes. So great question. I think it's most people's question. Most people think I'm either an estate planning attorney or a financial advisor. And I do not give financial advice. I also don't give legal advice. So I don't do either of those work. So I'm based in California, and in California, we do things a little differently. And we have this small license called professional fiduciary. And I see it as an umbrella term. And under that umbrella of being a private fiduciary, I can act as someone's conservator or guardian. I can act as a trustee. I can act as an executor for someone's estate. And I can also act as someone's agent under their durable power of attorney for finance and even in their advanced healthcare directive as a healthcare decision maker. So there's a lot of different hats that I can wear. In my practice, I really specialize in trust administration. So to just simplify for listeners, I'm basically a private trustee. And what originally brought me to this work was originally I thought I'd be a hospice nurse. I felt really called to serving in end-of-life care after being with a loved one's final 3 days of life. And it honestly was a mystical experience for me where I think I was forced into the present moment. I think that's really the beauty of death, is that it can bring into focus, our actual life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was really kind of my calling, my initial connection. I didn't know where the breadcrumbs would take me. The plan was not to be a professional fiduciary, but after kind of going back to school and started nursing, I was feeling like it wasn't the right fit. And then I started working for a professional fiduciary out in Sacramento, California. And really the rest is history. I just fell in love with the work. It brings in so many different parts of my interest, personal finance being one of the reasons why I was excited to be on the podcast today. And, financial literacy, all of these pieces kind of come into the work that I do. And of course, that end-of-life care piece, whether I do have clients where I will act as their healthcare decision maker. And so that's where, I'm working alongside, hospice and seeing their final affairs go. But then I also am administering their trusts and estates. And really, I'm the one that's entrusted to carry out their final wishes. So there's just a lot of course, responsibility, a lot of trust. But this absolutely is there's just such deep work and really meaningful relationships. So it keeps me always engaged and always learning.
Well, I bet. And it's so important because it's one of the major times in people's lives. And, for the people that are in the process of passing, obviously it's a major point of their life, but also so much for the family members that are left, that are going through all of that. And that can be, they can be so many different things. It can be difficult and challenging. If there's family tensions, it can be, and you can speak to this, I'm sure, sometimes a very stressful and almost miserable experience, or it can be this thing of great beauty, and it brings everyone else together.
Yeah.
And that's not even talking about the financial pieces, right? So we talk a lot on this show about the focus is on the pre-end of the estate planning stuff, which is parents teaching their kids about money and then how to move towards financial independence, and young adults how to move towards financial independence. But there's also this very important piece on the other end, which is protecting all of that stuff.
I love that you bring that up because it's exactly that.
Yeah. So I go ahead and speak to that. Just talk about some of your experiences with that and why that's so important.
Yeah, well, so much. personal, like I mentioned before, personal finance is like absolutely a love and passion of mine. So I listen to a lot of podcasts like yours, and, my whole, I would say, well, now I'm in the phase of a wealth building journey, but, over a decade ago, before I came to this work and I was in my young 20s trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to do with my life, a lot of soul searching. And I also didn't really have modeled like a healthy relationship with money. And really, it wasn't until I think I was almost 30 that I realized, like, oh, wow, I have a good amount of trauma, specifically in the area of finances. So by the time I was 18, my parents had lost everything, not once, but twice. And so my early 20s, I kind of was off on my own. I put myself through school, and part of that is I had a lot of student loan debt. So when I was in my early 20s, it was beginning to figure out a plan of how I could actually pay that off. And when you're so young, and I was the generation graduating in the economic recession after 2008 housing crisis and that bubble burst. So no one was hiring. I was the generation where, all those promises were made of just take out the loans and you'll pay them off right away. And nope, that was not true at all. Yeah. So, personal finance for me has been so much of my love for the work, and also supporting families that have created a significant amount of wealth, enough to pass on and leave for their, whether it's their family or charities. All of my clients, like, what I love about the work is it's as unique as us, right? Your estate plan is going to really be unique to you. But after my debt payoff journey, and now I'm in this place of accumulating wealth. I'm in my mid-30s, so that makes sense. And I'm sure that's probably a lot of your listeners, right? And also supporting their children, figuring out what they want to do with their life and their career and fiscal responsibility. And a big part of that too is protecting our assets. And, of course, there's products for that, like insurance, and then another big crucial piece, I think, of, financial planning. It goes hand in hand with estate planning. So that's where I love speaking with people proactively, reaching people earlier, not downstream, because Dominic, that's kind of the sad reality in the United States. Only 1 in 3 people have their estate plan.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where everybody knows, oh, I know I'm supposed to do that and I should do that. And I'll get to that later, because I don't think they understand exactly what it all entails. So that seems to me part of the problem. So it's just kind of this thing that I should do. And maybe it's expensive, or I need to talk to a lawyer, or do some research online. And it just never happens because people are busy with so many other things. But yet I think it's so important. So
yeah, it is. And I've been reflecting on this a lot, as I continue to have conversations like this, and also on my podcast, of what is the barrier. And of course, I get it. I'm a mother myself. I'm, juggling running a business and podcasting and mothering a toddler and life, especially when you're in the messy middle. It's just, there's
busy.
so much demanding.
Yeah.
So I get it. It's like the time, the lack of resources, the lack of information. But I think what it really is more about, of why most of us don't plan, is the denial of death.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that's so important. And you touched on the importance of death being an important thing to consider, right? Because it helps us live. And I know this quote freaks some people out because they don't understand it. And it comes from Carlos Castaneda. It's "Death is my ally, fearsome yet wise counsel." And the point is understanding, like you said, we know that's a certain thing. We're all going to die at some point. So denying it doesn't do you any good, right? Understanding and accepting, look, it's going to happen. Then the point of that quote is, then make the most of your life now. Appreciate what you have now, because this idea that, okay, it's finite, it's going to end, helps focus you and ground you. And I think then that, if you can accept that, then I would think the estate planning part would become easier, because now you're not denying the inevitable. But I think that's so prevalent. So I'm glad you brought that up. So what have your experiences been with that?
Well, I mean, I think that is just the reality. And the more that we lean in and acknowledge that our brain tricks us, that we all think that there's going to be a tomorrow. And Dominic, what was kind of strange and interesting that's happened to me recently is that I actually took over several cases from a colleague, a professional fiduciary, and she was on her deathbed transferring cases to me. I didn't know her. I had 2 30-minute phone calls before she passed. And, but it's kind of been a perfect storm for me between this podcasting journey and having more and more conversations like this. But then with this kind of hitting my life, personally, professionally, and it's really kind of stopped me in my tracks that even as professionals, we should know better, right?
Yeah.
And my knee jerk response was to my brain just wants to have all this reason of why did this happen? Was she holding on to this work for money? I found out she hadn't paid herself in over a decade.
Holy cow. Wow.
So it wasn't that.
Yeah. How old was she?
She was older too.
Okay.
And then was it a sudden death? No. She was sick for many years. I think at the end of the day, what I'm beginning to see form is this comes down to identity. Who we're choosing to be. I think that she held on because she really was holding on to being that expert, the only one that could do it. But ultimately, I think that it does tie back to the kind of initial point of the denial of death, that I'm going to be able to continue this. And, downstream, I can see whether we're in our later years, whether we're sick or we have a diagnosis, or whether we're just parents ourselves and in the messy middle of life, this threat of the denial of death is very present, and especially in our culture in the US, right? We're all about productivity. We like the shiny and new. And honestly, our elders are pushed aside, and we're a death-denying culture. So that's where I think we can't have enough conversations like this. The other piece, I think, is that the estate plan is really kind of this trifecta of areas that people don't like to talk about or look at. We've talked about the death piece, but also it comes up against money and our assets. And then it also touches upon our family and our support and our relationships. And I think after doing this work, what I see is that all families are dysfunctional. It's just to what degree. And so all of this is where I think the more that we talk about it, the more that we release and let go of shame, the more emotional, the more spiritual, the more that we practice and live this, the more that we can set up not only our own lives, but our children for success.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's good you bring that up too, because I think to some extent, it seems to me you can't, the idea of talking about, I'm planning for, what happens after my death, then if you can get to that, but then that forces you to then confront all of these other things in terms of family dynamics and all sorts of stuff. So I think it seems like to me like that all fits together, and those can be uncomfortable things. And so the avoidance, outside of what I said, which was just, I was looking at it from a very sort of practical, well, people just don't want to deal with the practicality of it. But I'm glad you bring up all these other points, because now that you say all that, it makes me realize, oh no, you're probably right. Those are probably much bigger subconscious barriers than the obvious upfront ones that came to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's the one guarantee in life. No one's coming out alive.
Yeah.
And yet most of us don't plan for it.
Yeah.
And so that's where, for me, I've just been on a mission to reach people upstream. I've administered hundreds of trusts and estates over the decade that I've been doing this work. And the interesting piece is that, why do professionals get involved? Sometimes I'm being named proactively, so being named in successor roles in clients' estate planning documents. So these are like kind of the more of the quote unquote success cases. These are typically highly educated people, high net worth individuals, and people that are working with a team of professionals and setting up that plan so it wins. They're working with their attorney. Typically, they also have a financial advisor. They're a CPA, and they're doing everything they can to kind of maximize success for their plan and their family's unique needs. And then the other piece of the work that I do is kind of the, why is a professional needed? There was no plan, or the plan that was set up really failed. The worst case scenarios that I've dealt with, it's financial elder abuse. The wrong people were put in place and entrusted.
So Sara, let's step back for a second. So let's talk about just the basic components of an estate plan, and talk a minute about what kind of things go in there and how that should function. And then let's come back around to when you get someone where there's elder abuse, or you've got a trustee that's managing a trust who isn't doing a good job, and then the strife and tension that creates. But let's talk about how it functions first, just for anybody who's listening who still isn't familiar with that.
Yeah, and I'm going to start off. I'm not an attorney. I don't give legal advice, and everything is really going to be state specific. So that's where I am not a proponent of DIYing this.
Sure.
You want to work with an estate planning attorney in your local state. Partner with them. It's worth the investment. I can't tell you, again, going back to like where things fail, it's a lot of times it is kind of those DIY cases. But going back to your question of, what is an estate plan? There's going to be a will, maybe a trust, depending on the amount of assets you had. Again, going back to what state you live in. I'm in California, so if you own real estate, most families really do need to have a trust in place. And then there's also what's called the power of attorney documents for both finance and healthcare. And this is one of kind of the pieces that I find, and again, this is for clients that are working with me, a professional, proactively. And so I would say they're steps ahead of most families. Most people are only thinking that their estate plan is after death. And it also is part of incapacity. So, who is going to be making those end-of-life healthcare decisions for you? Or maybe it's not even end of life, but healthcare decisions in the event that you're incapacitated. And then also, who would be responsible for writing checks and managing money, again, when you're still alive and lack capacity?
Yeah, and so just as for some examples of that, because that can be hard. So like people that are in their 30s, that can be hard to sort of think about, or you think, well, it'll always be fine. But I mean, I'm a physical therapist by background, and I've worked with elderly people for a long time. And so I've seen a lot, and seen them right when things happen and they get sick. And so, or events happen, right? So it could be that, your father that's 62 or 68 or whatever, older, but still young and seems vibrant and great, has a stroke. And now all of a sudden, depending on how that stroke is, that can affect mental or cognitive things as well as physical things. And now they need someone, or at least maybe not indefinitely as they recover from the stroke, which can take a while, but early on, they need someone to be able to make those healthcare decisions. So having that power of attorney for healthcare is extremely important. But also, like you said, right? Let's say that, it's just him, your mom has passed on already, and, but he still lives at home and has a house and has payments on that house, someone that has to make those payments, right? So if there needs to be a power of attorney for finances, like you're saying, in order to take care of those things, whether it's for a short period of time or if it's indefinite, or someone gets Parkinson's, or, or some I mean, all sorts of things can happen. All right, like, my mom is quite elderly. She lives now with my sister, and she's still cognitively with it and capable, but also she doesn't want to do it anymore. And so, right, her trustees manage her money and pay whatever bills she has. And she has input into that, and she still makes her own healthcare decisions, but it's also set in place that if something happens and she can't, then it's clear and identified who steps in and makes those decisions. So you just
You
never
painted
know.
a perfect picture. That's exactly kind of the whole rainbow, different ways that I begin working with clients. And of course, there's those really sad situations, where there's a horrible diagnosis. I would say with my younger clients, it is like something like a cancer or something sudden, like aneurysm or just, a stroke, where it is really sudden. But I would say more times than not, when I begin working with clients, it's a situation actually like your mother. She's getting older. She's needing a little bit more support. Sure, she could do it herself, but does she want to? And so that's where it's really working alongside clients. And, in that scenario, of course, they're making as much decisions as they possibly can. And that's, I think, where finding the right team and people is a crucial step of planning well. So I also see a lot where we're approaching estate planning more from this place of, let me just check it off the box of things to do. And I really want to speak to people proactively of saying, oh my gosh, this could be one of the greatest acts of love that you do for yourself, for your family. And this really can have a ripple across future generations. Because I think that most of us know of a family that battled it out in court, or maybe it wasn't even in court. It was just after mom and dad died, things were just a mess, and now there's just no one talks to each other. That's exactly what we want to avoid. Absolutely. Yeah, maybe that family stayed out of probate, but nobody's, seeing each other again during the holidays and not speaking to each other, and they fought over, whether I've seen all sorts of things from, of course, assets, but to also just even a Barbie doll collection.
Today's episode is sponsored by Money Mavericks. Parents, if you've ever thought, I wish my kid could learn about money without all the stress and confusion that I went through, you're going to love this. Money Mavericks is a video game, but it's not like the others. It's a fast-paced, choose-your-own-path financial adventure that teaches kids how to make smart money decisions before they have to face them in real life. It's built on over a decade of insights from 100-plus millionaire interviews, and it's tested by certified financial accountability coaches using 66 of the most common real-life money situations. And here's what makes it different. It doesn't just teach kids dollars and cents. It helps them develop the mindset, habits, and behaviors behind true wealth, financially, sure, but also in their relationships, career, and health. Give your child a head start toward freedom, confidence, and a life they're proud to build. Head to www.accountable.network to learn more and grab Money Mavericks today. It's totally free. Because your kid's future, it's worth more than just a high score. Thanks to Money Mavericks for sponsoring this episode. Yeah, just crazy stuff. And for anybody listening who thinks, well, that's not going to be my family. Maybe that's true. Hopefully it is true. And you can speak to this, Sarah, but I have seen so many families over the years in working with the elderly, and the family dynamics come into play. And I'm not doing the things that you're doing, but we see it kind of from an earlier point, like when they've been sick and all this stuff is getting started and they're making healthcare decisions, and they've got to decide, what are we doing with the house if they're not going to be able to go back home? And so all the financial pieces come into it, and families that seemed like they were good before and you never know which ones can turn, because all it takes is one person in there somewhere to then start to complicate everything. And then it gets really stressful and difficult and funky fast. And so for anybody who's thinking, well, that will never happen to me, I would strongly recommend don't make that assumption. It's better to have the plan in place. And if it doesn't happen, great, the plan is still there and it still makes it easier for everyone. But if you've got that plan in place, it's going to help with that. So what are your thoughts
It
there?
is. Well, and I think that the other piece too is, at the end of the day, people are grieving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether this person is incapacitated. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and boy, that is hard. It was from diagnosis to her death, it was about an 8-year journey.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just that slow, long goodbye, these little deaths along the way. And there's, of course, the sudden unexpected death. It's going to all take different shape, but each person's going to process that differently. So, that's where, again, going back to where we started, of only 1 in 3 people actually have an estate plan. Boy, we can do so much better. In my dream world, we all have done this planning, right? We've all taken the time. But even, and I hate to kind of set the stage where it's like, this is, there's more to be done. But the reality is the estate plan is just the starting point. Because really, after the estate plan, after we do the legal documents, there's so much more that we can do to, of course, there's never a guarantee of things going according to plans, but we can prep and set the stage for our loved ones so that this plan is going to be implemented well and understood. So again, this is going back to identity of who are we choosing to be? So that's where, again, I love speaking to parents, because I've found for my own journey as a mother, it's required so much evolution, and really choosing to be, I guess, like, of course, the grown up, choosing to not outsource our power. What that looks like, what I see in my practice, is we're coming to estate planning with just worry, anxiety, not knowing, and we're going to outsource our power to our professionals. We're not going to understand our documents, and then we're going to shove it in the drawer and not ever think about it again. This is, I'm sorry, most likely going to be a failed plan. So this is where I think estate planning can expand so much more beyond just, legal documents. This is why my podcast is called The Legacy of Love, because it really, if I can reach people, if we can reach you upstream long before any of this is going to happen, hopefully, right? Knock on wood.
Mm-hmm.
This requires us to be willing to face our own mortality, willing to have the difficult conversation. And it's also just this ongoing cultivation, because these are living documents. So once we get them done, we're going to need to be updating it over the years.
Yeah.
And so as our lives evolve, also as our children get older, we're going to be making those needed updates. So
Because your assets are going to change, the money that you have, because in your estate plan, so we talked about the power of attorney for healthcare and for finances, but also you're going to take whatever assets you have, they go into, usually people will put them in a trust, and then there's a trustee, and we can talk about that in a second. But then that also then specifies in that plan, okay, when you die, here's what happens with this stuff. Otherwise, it's in probate, like you said, it's in court, it's held up for who knows how long. Anybody can challenge it. That's outside of just sort of family member dynamics. But to the extent that it's all specified in that trust, then it just makes it a lot more clear what your intentions were and what's supposed to happen. It's a more straightforward path. But like you said, you also, not only can you update that ongoing over the year, but you should be updating that, right? So if you have an estate plan in place now, right, and you're in your 30s, that's likely to be different a decade from now and a decade after that, and then another decade after that.
Oh, exactly. And, also laws change, tax codes change.
Yeah.
So again, these are all reasons where we're beginning to build a team around us, right? And a plan around us. Of course, I'm sure with everything that you talk about on this podcast financially, of like how we can make those good, wise decisions and also cultivate raising our kids to be financially literate. I mean, this is so much of the work, but it also requires us to be doing this ourselves. And that's where I think the estate plan is just, it's going to be ongoing. I mean, for me, my husband and I updated our documents about a year ago, shortly after having our daughter, who's now 2. And I definitely know the guardianship piece, those people are going to be changing as she grows up, as we build more community around us, seeing who's involved, who continues to be involved in our life and her life. And also as we change as parents, as she changes, what if we move also out of state? All of these things are going to be kind of trigger events for needing to go back and update our plan. So this is where I think that we moving away from this, okay, let's just check it off the box of things to do, this denial of death, this is just such a disservice for ourselves, for our families. And the families that are creating these successful plans, they have like this culture where we're willing to lean in and face kind of these hard realities that we're all going to die. So I think that the other piece too, let me share kind of maybe a success case.
Yeah,
if that's helpful.
Yeah.
I think more times than not, we have kind of the horror story examples with this work and we scare people.
Yeah.
But I'm still in my 30s, so I have a lot of they're just called like sub trusts, and I'm basically holding this pot of money for younger beneficiaries until they reach a certain age. So I'm a big proponent of that. I don't think an 18-year-old is ever going to be equipped to know what to do with millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars even.
Yeah.
Putting it in trust, until they either reach a certain age or a certain milestone, I think is one of the great things about planning.
So Sarah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When someone does, so let's say someone has, okay, I'm going to put this money into trust for this child. And can they specify then what, and they put you in charge of that, someone like you in charge of that. Okay, you're going to be the trustee who oversees how this money is spent. And then can they specify the age at which the child or adult can then take control of that money?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So that's really interesting, right? Because it's come up a lot on our show, like UTMAs, right? Like different financial investment vehicles for kids, but those maturation ages are decided by the state, right? So in some states it's 18, some states it's 21, but you don't get to decide, you know what, this kid's going to take a little longer to mature, and I don't want them to have access to this money until they're 26 or 30 or whatever. But if you put these things into a trust, then you have control over that age, that maturation age. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
so that's kind of with this success case. So there are 3 separate sub trusts. So each of let's just say granddaughters, to make it an easy example. Each of the granddaughters have 3 separate trusts, and or I shouldn't say 3 separate trusts, but they each have a trust, right? And it's going to stay in trust till they reach age 30. There was also very strong directive in the trust language and what's called like a letter of intent or a memorandum of intent. It doesn't replace the estate planning document. So in this example, it's the trust, but it kind of supplements it. And the grandmother had a really strong directive that these funds were to be used to supplement, not support, the girl's life. And so what that looked like, it could pay for education. It could pay for, she really valued travel and specifically family trips. And so from the get-go, these girls in their early 20s knew you're not going to be getting money. You're not going to be living off this trust fund. You need to either be working or going to school. And with each 3 of them, I cannot tell you, I've been working with them for over 5 years, and one is actually going to be turning 30 at the end of this year, so 2025. And she's engaged, she's about to get married, and she's now a nurse, she has a career. I mean, really, she is just set up to win. And I love cases like this. I would say it's not kind of the standard, but I think so much of it does go back to what the grandmother did in the planning phase.
Yeah.
of spending the time and getting really clear on what are her values and what does she want to pass down kind of to that next generation. And I see where that just has a ripple. Like I feel that for not only these girls, but now just seeing them as becoming young women, choosing to partner, choosing to have children. It sets the tone for also even again that next generation.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that this work really does have the power to not only transform our life, our family, future generations, but we really could change the world. So that's again where I just think that this work is so important, and that there really is so much that we can do at that individual level if we're willing to like kind of be brave, be willing to have the difficult conversation, and really reflect on what is important to me, what are those kind of those values that I feel that I want to pass down to kind of the next generation.
Yeah, right. Well, and so important. So, in our context of financial independence, if that's something that's important to you and you've been teaching your kids about finances and helping them understand, look, you can reach financial independence and retire, not retire, but you can have more options, and you don't have to keep working at an earlier age than traditional retirement age if you manage your money right. And if you have money to leave to them, or there's money from a grandparent that is going to be left to them, you can have those conversations with the grandparent and set things up in a trust like this to where those things can benefit those kids going forward as they move into adulthood in all kinds of ways. And I think it's so important what you said about taking what it is that you value. Like in that example, that grandmother, she valued education. It wasn't just here, live off of this. Because that can just be too tempting, especially when you're younger and you just don't understand all the things that you don't know yet, right? Or family trips, travel, right? Or whatever it is that you might value, you can set that up and nudge people or guide them or move them or set them up for advantages in certain ways for things that are important to you that are really going to benefit them down the line. So that's a really cool concept. And I think that's a great example because it shows how, like you were saying, it's not just planning for when bad things happen. It's setting things up, and it really is then this idea of I want to do this really loving, great thing for my kids or my grandkids or whatever it is, because I'm at this point where I have these resources and I've had this great life. And when I pass this on, I want to do it in a way that's important for me that I also know will help them. I mean, that to me seems like it would be much more of a pull and a draw to want to start thinking about your estate plan rather than I don't want to deal with,
Yeah, I
So
know.
that's
I
cool.
know. Yeah, it is. I mean, it really is. And it's hard to kind of convey that because I think so much, again, the estate plan is kind of put in this box of, oh, it's only about your death, which no one wants to really talk about. I mean, like think about every movie that touches, this kind of subject. What do they start off with? The family sitting down at the attorney's office and it's like, surprise, this is who gets what.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is not what, to me, proper planning looks like. It should not be a surprise at your death of, what's going on
Yeah, right. Good point.
at all. I think that again, it's like this ongoing kind of conversation. And again, it's not only with kind of your heirs or beneficiaries, but also with, those players. So whether you're working with a professional, most people aren't working with a professional, but if you're naming those, you know, let's just say it's your children or maybe an entrusted friend as trustee and as power of attorney, making sure that you're having conversations proactively ahead of time kind of sets them up for success of knowing this is what I really wanted. So again, that's where I say the estate plan is really just the starting point.
Yeah.
But for listeners, I want to say it's also could be a doorway for so much more, of getting clear on our own values, our own wishes for our loved ones, and really kind of honoring what's brought us to this point in life. And it's, I don't know, I think it's, yeah, it requires us to be brave, right?
Yeah,
Or
but in
just
an
rephrase.
exciting way, if you think about it. I mean, well, in two ways, I guess, right? So just going back to thinking about parents with kids, you want to think about, well, if you're not planning on something happening to you, but if something does, some accident, traumatic event, you want to have thought about and know and have it legally established who's going to take care of your kids and who's going to manage their money, and I mean all those sorts of things. And you can do all that with an estate plan. So there's a practical component of, okay, if things go bad, we want to, that's just reducing stress, right? We want to have less anxiety and less stress because we know we've thought this through and here's what we want to have happen. And as that changes, like we talked about, you can update that, but that's a way to reduce that anxiety if something goes wrong. And you hope that never happens, but
Yeah. Even for me, like once we got our estate plan updated, there is like this feeling of relief
yeah.
and also just feeling like it just feels good, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's
you
kind
know,
of it's sort of analogous to finances, right? So
it
so
really
right
is.
as you're working on your finances and learning how to manage your money better, when you get to a point where you're financially stable, which is you've got things in line and you understand, what your spending is and what you value, and you're setting money aside to invest. And when you've got 6 months of living expenses set aside, there's a financial stability there where you're like, okay, I can weather sort of various different things and I'm in control of my money and now I'm growing it to invest it. That's one thing. And then when you get to financial independence, it's a whole nother. We're like, well, man, now I don't have to work if I don't want to. I don't have to trade my time for money. If I love my job, I can keep doing it. But if I want to explore these other things, I have all these options. And it seems almost like that to me with the estate planning, right? So the financial stability piece would be, okay, we've decided if something happens, some traumatic thing happens, what happens with our stuff and who's going to take care of our kids and manage things for them until they're older, all that stuff. But then there's this other thing we were talking about a few minutes ago, which is, man, thinking about the legacy that you could set up for people and the fun parts of, well, I've built this money over time. How can I use this to benefit others when I'm gone, and how do I set that up? And that's to me seems very expansive and kind
Yes,
of a
right.
very sort of cool thing to be thinking about, because you could just, again, it's back to what you value and then how you want to pass that on. That's really cool. I hadn't thought about that piece of it so much before, so that's really cool.
Oh, it's absolutely that. And I think, I mean, for me, I love that practice of expanding to think beyond myself, right? This
Hmm.
is like I guess the thing that connects us all, whatever you want to call it, whether it's God or, life force, the universe. I mean, that kind of connection. And I think that the more that we're approaching this and see the potential that our estate plan can, I mean, it really has that ripple effect for our own life of who we're choosing to be, and being those present connected.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It really can change the world.
no, I think that's great. And being present is so important, right? And not avoiding the known fact that nobody gets out alive, right? That we're all going to die, helps you focus more on the present, I think. If you can just get over that, yeah, it's scary to think about, but it's going to happen. You're not planning on it happening tomorrow, but having things in place helps you then now focus more on making the most of the life that you have today and tomorrow, and for however long it lasts.
It's absolutely that. I'm glad you see it too.
Oh yeah, 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 for sure. So I don't know, what other thoughts do you have? Any final thoughts or suggestions for people?
You know, if this resonates, come on over, come listen to a few episodes at the Legacy of Love, wherever you're at with your estate planning journey. Whether you already have an estate plan and maybe you just approached it of the ways that we described, like most people, let's just check it off the box of things to do. This is not fun. Or maybe you don't have an estate plan and you want to know a place to start. I have all kind of conversations, a lot of estate planning attorneys, and there's just a huge range of topics that we approach this work of just really trying to demystify, what the estate plan is and what we can do to set up our loved ones for that legacy of love. And I also have a free workbook for listeners. You can include that in the show notes, but it's trustandhonor.co/workbook. And really, it's wherever you're at in your estate planning journey, it's an exercise for you to go through to really get clear on your values, your wishes. I think that if we really start from that place, that's where we're going to do a great job at setting that intention and getting things prepped for then when we're sitting down with our attorney and having the conversation with our loved ones and having also the conversation with ourselves of what does a good death look like. If we're really getting clear of what are our values and where do we want to start, I think that it really can have just a whole ripple on your whole experience of estate planning.
Yeah, that's so great. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I will definitely put links for the podcast and for Trust and Honor in the show notes. So I encourage people to go check out both the website and Sarah's pod. So thank you so much, Sara, for coming on, and just thank you for the really important work that you're doing. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dominic. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the FI for Kids podcast. Please support the show by hitting subscribe and receive new episodes every Thursday. The intro and exit music this episode are courtesy of Douglas Cameron. As always, you can find links to the FI for Kids music in the show notes. Thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
You're like the horizon. I can't reach you, you're so far away. And if I run to the place I want you to stay, you'd be gone. I'd be left wondering why you moved on, and why you never said goodbye. I can't wait any longer. I see the writing on the wall. It's time for us to say, tomorrow we are yesterday. Tomorrow we are yesterday. You're like the sunset. You're glowing bright, but you're fading. And what I don't get is why I'm left here waiting. But I'm like a phoenix. I will rise up from this fire. It's something we can't fix. I guess it's time for us to retire.